People who divorced after only 1 year, what happened? Story 1, he cheated. He's still with her 12 years later. So now that the initial pain has long since faded, I can't even hate. Clearly, they had something genuine, and at least I didn't waste more time with a guy who wasn't meant for me. Story 2. A girl I went to school with got married while still in high school. Her parents were drug addicts and abusive. She and an older guy friend, who was 18, decided to get married to get her out of her situation. He offered her parents money if they would sign for her to get married at 16. They never acted like a married couple or slept together because he is gay, and they got divorced a little over a year later as soon as she turned 18 but continued living together as roommates. Nothing went wrong. That had been the plan the whole time. No idea where they are now. Story 3. He lost his job and became paranoid that I, who was working, was cheating. My job was about a 20-minute drive away, but if there was traffic and it took me 30 minutes, I was interrogated about my whereabouts. All of this took place maybe 3 months after we got married. We weren't married much longer after that. More trouble occurred, but yeah. Story 4. Had a cousin who married a real piece of work. As background, my extended family tends to drink too much, get too loud, and get too rowdy. The family reunion had been kicked out and banned from multiple venues. My cousin shows up with her fiancé 1 year, and he's an absolute disaster. Picking fights, lighting fireworks, terrorizing people's pets. He's so bad that my uncle, her dad, who by the way is probably the loudest and most obnoxious of the bunch, has to pull him aside and say, "You need to take it down a notch." She marries him anyway because she doesn't understand that's him on his best behavior. They lasted less than a year. She won't talk about it, but the rumor was she found out he was involved with methamphetamine. Story 5. Instead of being with me when I was going through chemotherapy or even giving me a ride there and back, he was engaging with male escorts in CVS parking lots. He also liked to use threats of suicide and self-harm to manipulate me. Story 6. Not me, but a woman whose husband claimed to be in the Navy because her father was, and even bought a Navy uniform off eBay to get married in. She found out when she pushed to get a Veterans Affairs loan so they could buy a house, and his story all fell apart. Story 7. I came to find out that she was trying to separate me from my friends and family so she could control me, like her mother controls her father. The signs were all there, and I just overlooked them. We were divorced after 6 weeks. Story 8. I call it my starter marriage. He grossly misrepresented who he was. He was willing to move mountains for us until we were us. Then he turned controlling to the point where he changed the way my keys were on my keychain. This was back when all cars and homes had keys. He refused to mow the lawn and would fight the tickets he got for it by arguing that the base allowed 12 inches, and it was only 11.5 inches. He would eat everything in the house, leaving me no food, and then complain that he couldn't lose weight. His gift-giving went from diamond earrings before marriage to a muffler in the box after marriage. The muffler is part of car maintenance. It's not a birthday gift. The final straw for me was when he got mad at our kitten for being a kitten, and he threw him across the room. If he does that to an animal, what will he do to a tiny human? I left at 7 months. We didn't even make it a year. Story 9, we lasted a little over a year. The first sign happened our first night home from the honeymoon. He said he was going to sleep on the couch because he'd be more comfortable there, and that's where he slept nearly every night. He all but ignored me unless he had a work function for me to attend. Half an hour after I got home from having abdominal surgery, he asked what I was going to make for dinner. The final straw was when he yelled at me for spending $8, yes, 8, on a pair of shoes for my grandfather's funeral. Then he spent $800 on a single golf club the next buried. Lots of little things on a daily basis that let me know that he was perfectly happy with me being miserable. I grew my first hints of self-respect during that year and decided I was worth more. Story 10. A colleague of mine became involved with a guest staying at the hotel where we work, despite being barely a year into her marriage. Eventually, she admitted the affair, particularly when she became pregnant and was unsure of the paternity. Story 11. I was cheated on before and during the short marriage, and she began frequently using drugs. It wasn't meant to last long and shouldn't have happened in the first place. Oh well, hindsight is 20/20, right? Story 12. His controlling side emerged. as well as his only what I want sexually matters attitude. I had to pull a knife out one evening to get him to stop. He also threatened to stab my friends who were acting as my security guards when I was on campus after I had left him. Story 13. Prescription drug addict. No one knew, and all she did was open credit cards in my name and stocked up on prescription pain pills. Didn't even fight or go to a lawyer, just signed off on papers. Story 14. An acquaintance of mine had an interesting story. His wife sat him down the day they came back from their honeymoon. Apparently, she had met someone at work some months before, and flirting ensued. What she told him was that she thought it was just cold feet, so she kept going forward with the wedding. She chickened out on calling it off the day of, even though this was apparently when a light went on, and she knew she didn't want to be with him. He is a good sport about it and takes solace in knowing it was all her. He married a wonderful lady later and has a gaggle of kids. His ex-wife and the random dude dated for a while, but did not stay together. Story 15. I found messages from her to 2 different men she knew, trying to convince them to come to where we lived and kill me. Also, I found out that she was cheating on me as well with someone local. Story 16. A tiny bit longer than that. We had been dating for a while. It was good. Both our families were pressuring us to make it official. So eventually, we caved. She is lovely, but she wasn't my partner. A fantastic partner for someone else. I did find my person later on, and we've been happy for over 2 decades. We would likely have broken up anyway. Again, we were good to each other, just not really for each other. But we had extra steps thanks to family pressure. Story 17. We dated for 3 years before getting married. After getting married, everything changed and became more real. We were both 20 years old and very naive about our future and didn't really think it out. It was gradual in our marriage, but at some point, I realized that we wanted very different things in life. Although we were compatible, we would hold each other back from our future plans. It's been more than 30 years. I talked to him, well, as much as you do on social media. I would never be able to live the life he leads now and be happy. He would never be able to live my life the way I live it now and be happy. It was inevitable that we would divorce. I have never held on to any resentment towards him, just the sober awareness that we didn't think things out in a realistic way, so I took the blame. He married the right person the second time around, and I married the right person the second time around. Story 18. Looking back, we were already on the verge of an abusive relationship. But once we got married, he said, "Why would you argue about that? You know who you chose to marry. I want to move back to my hometown, and you know who you married." The reasoning the other way around didn't hold up for him, obviously. He used physical violence against me 2 months after marriage when I would fight this argument for the first time. I left after only 4 months. He was convinced I wouldn't leave anymore once the papers were signed, and everything escalated. He was wrong. Story 19. An old roommate of mine married a man who is gay. She found out 8 months in when she caught him with porn. She mentioned she suspected something since they never engaged in sexual activities, only 4 times in those 8 months. She was gorgeous, too. She was a model. Story 20. Not me, but my husband's first marriage. To be fair, they got married after only knowing each other for 6 months, which isn't nearly enough time to get to know someone before marrying them. They were young, about 22 years old, and impulsive. Luckily, no children came from that situation. Within 6 months of marriage, she quit her job without discussing it first with her husband. She spent the last of her savings on a full arm tattoo, also without discussing it with her husband first. Not that she needs permission, but if she wants to spend the last of her savings on something that could be considered unwise, there should be a discussion. She then managed to drain their joint savings account like $3,000 while he was away at a training school. That was the last straw. Story 21. I realized I deserved better. He was so angry all the time, and I was constantly walking on eggshells. I definitely settled when I married him. I had a child before meeting him and thought no one else would ever want to date me. Story 22. He hit me. I'm 4 feet 11 inches tall, and he's 6 feet 3 inches tall. He physically abused me. He twisted my arms, burning my skin and hurting my shoulders, elbows, and wrists. He is in law enforcement. He emotionally and sexually abused me. He cheated on me with a coworker. The unit he was supposed to be supervising, which involves managing the inmates, was experiencing an explosion in herpes cases. 11 months. He financially abused me. He insisted I not work. Then when I asked for money for tampons, he made me wait for a while before asking me, "Do you really need them?" Story 23. I had a coworker who got married to her college boyfriend, came back from their Caribbean honeymoon, and a month later told us she was pregnant. Everyone was happy for her. Until later that week, I saw her crying coming out of our boss's office. I found out later that day that she was indeed pregnant, but by another guy. A guy that would bartend at our office parties a couple of times a year. Apparently, they had been having sex through her entire engagement and 1 month of marriage. She ended up getting a divorce and trying to make it work with the bartender. Let's just say it was weird at the next couple of office parties. They didn't seem too happy together. Story 24. She pressured me to open up the relationship so she could date women. I did the work of wrapping my head and heart around being in a one-sided polyamorous relationship and actually got to the point of being happy for her. Then she caught feelings for one of them and decided she didn't want to be married to a man anymore. It was especially horrible because the relationship was very happy up to that point, and she did this at a time when we happened to be working very closely on a project I couldn't bow out of. Story 25. He got addicted to opioids after back surgery. He became mean and cold and stopped physical contact. He had no job and took my whole salary to manage himself. He was controlling and lazy. I'm glad I left after just 5 months of living together. Story 26. We got pregnant on our honeymoon because my husband accidentally threw my birth control away. My doctor appointment was 2 weeks away, and he would not use protection. Fast forward several months, and he was having an affair with our neighbor because I got fat. Story 27. Not me, but my friend. He ended the relationship after 10 months. She was very unreasonable. She maintained her own residence and never moved in with him. She brought her child on their honeymoon to Disney World and spent all the time with the child, excluding him. She was also constantly yelling at him. This is why you shouldn't get engaged to someone you've only dated for a month. Story 28. He expected me to return to work almost immediately after a medically necessary breast reduction and put his marijuana addiction over helping me with bills for a month so I could heal properly. He spent $650 on marijuana that month instead of helping his wife. He complained as soon as I got home from the hospital about how he's not okay with having to take care of me. I was in the emergency room one day and they had to keep me overnight for observation and possible blood patch after a lumbar puncture caused some complications, and he came to see me for not even 10 minutes. He left because the chair was uncomfortable and he wanted to go sleep in our cozy bed that I bought just like I bought almost everything else to turn our apartment into a home. He also stopped going to therapy and returned to his porn addiction while arguing that lust is in his blood. He would always trade one addiction for another and drove under the influence. I was not okay with that. I'm much happier knowing I'll never have to deal with that kind of behavior again. I believe that most of it was due to him being blinded by addiction, which he denied, but you can't help someone who refuses to help themselves, and I gave way too many chances. I even became a licensed peer support specialist to try and help him. Instead, I used what I learned to build up myself and develop the confidence to leave. Story 29. Summary. He was an angry, miserable man who made me miserable, and I should have realized earlier, but I was young and naive. I left 9 months after the wedding. Long version. I had almost canceled the wedding but convinced myself I was just getting cold feet. He was angry and judgmental all the time. He moved us into his mom's house until he found work. I was still studying at the time. Nothing was good enough for him. Everybody was too stupid. Every job was beneath him. His mom found him a job through a friend of hers. He went 2 days, then announced that if he was made to go back, he would crash the car into a tree. He said that he'd rather be homeless than do a job he didn't want. His brother asked, "What about your wife? You're married now." He said, "Oh, she'll follow." I made him go to therapy and moved back to a bigger city where I could find work. He decided he wanted to go work in Canada. That's when I knew I did not want to follow and be alone with him in a country where I knew nobody. I asked for a break to figure things out. He said either you leave me or we stay together. He didn't agree with breaks. I left. It was 9 months after the wedding. He wasn't supportive of anything I did. I was writing the first draft of my book at the time. He couldn't even get the genre right when people asked about it. He read a couple of chapters and said, "None of the characters are like me." He caused conflict with his family and mine. I understand now that he was extremely depressed but refused to go back to therapy after the first couple of sessions. He blamed it on me. He made my life miserable, and I accepted it because I have my own trauma not figured out. I ran straight into another terrible relationship with another angry man after that and lost another 9 years. I have now removed angry people from the life altogether.